Hi everyone, this is Rohit from Rifle Mastery, and I'm excited to have Joyce Zhang Gray, who's a CEO and co-founder of Alariss Global. Joyce was previously the first employee and head of sales for Human Interest, a Silicon Valley-based financial services technology company, and prior to that, she worked for the president of Microsoft Asia Pacific in Singapore as a regional manager for Groupon China and for McKinsey. A big thanks to Shruti Kapoor for the introduction. Welcome to the show, Joyce.
Thank you so much, Rohit. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So you have a great resume. You've done your bachelor's from Harvard. You went to Stanford, then you were to McKinsey, and you were an early employee at Human Interest. What got you interested in this crazy world of startups?
I think it was just kind of natural or organic. I saw a lot of problems that I was facing, especially when I was doing global expansion and building teams abroad. And I had actually many friends who are based overseas, in particular in India and China, who found it really difficult to expand to the US. And so naturally, I was starting to look for solutions to help with these problems, and I didn't really find any. And so I realized if you can't buy it, then you should just build it.
Interesting. And how did you get into Human Interest?
Yeah, so Human Interest at the time was called Captain 401. I was the first employee there, and it really resonated with me because it was a fintech product that was solving a real world solution, a real world problem, which is that many Americans actually do not have enough savings for their retirement. And financial security is something that, because of the way that US benefits are structured, is sometimes left up to employers to provide. So a lot of small businesses don't have the wherewithal to offer a 401k. So I thought it was, a really interesting product and very interesting solution to a big problem that I was aware of because I'd worked before in the Department of Labor and also in other government institutions that witnessed this problem. So I joined the founders as the first employee, and I actually was connected to the CEO because we went to college together and we had a lot of mutual friends. So it was very organic.
Interesting. And I'm interested about this because you're into sales. I spent a lot career in business development, partnerships, and sales. And I always wonder, who should build the sales playbook, especially in an early stage startup? Who's responsible? Is it the sales leader, or do you think the CEO is responsible for building the sales playbook?
Oh, yeah, I definitely think it needs to be the CEO or at least one of the founders, if possible. But if not one of the founders, then a founding team member. I suppose I was kind of in that position in the past, but usually it needs to be someone who really has the founder mentality, who is looking to grow the company, who can be thoughtful, strategic, experiment, and also align a lot of internal stakeholders, from product team to the finance team, if there is even a finance team. So I would say that what I usually coach a lot of the founders we work with on GTM is like, it should be founder-led selling. You are the only one who can make the decision, or you could authorize someone, again, an early employee, to make those decisions, but usually it has to be the founders. You have to know what works, what doesn't, and you can strategically decide what trade-offs are inherent in, the ICP that you would eventually start to work with.
Got it. And what made you start Alariss?
I started Alariss from, just simply seeing that there was a need in the market. It is so challenging. Go-to-market is challenging for everyone. It arguably is what makes or breaks a company. You can have the best product in the world, but if no one's buying from you, no one knows about you, then it's very difficult to have a viable business. And so one of the realizations I had when I was expanding American companies overseas is it's very manual, it's very expensive, and it's very challenging. And in the course of working overseas, I actually had many friends who are based in, Nairobi, Kenya, or Singapore, or in Bangalore, and they were really struggling to expand overseas, and it was actually 10 times harder for them. And I already thought it was hard as an American setting up, a branch office or a local sales and marketing team in other markets. I saw that it was much harder for them because, in addition to the time zones and the legal and the compliance and all the same things that I faced, usually they had a branding and credibility issue. And so it was something that really resonated with me. It didn't strike me as very fair. Why should you be judged differently because of your country of origin or because of the passport that you held? But that was just the reality in business. And I said, well, we could do something about this. And also it's actually very possible, just as Americans will hire remote workers in Asia, why can't Asian companies hire American salespeople to represent them? And this could be done remotely. So you don't even have to physically fly to the US and set up an office in order to start transacting and doing business with global clients.
Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned that Americans, if they want to launch in say India or China, they would hire somebody in remote work. But uh, uh, and foreign companies also want American talent. But how do you bridge the gap? How do you look at the supply and demand in the marketplace? What comes first when you're trying to build?
Yeah, well, this reminds me of some of those great books. I think there's like the Cold Start Problem and the Hard Things About Hard Things, or there's some, nice business books on the topics of like marketplaces and building things up at the beginning. For two-sided marketplaces like ours, there is the chicken and egg problem. And you need both to make it successful. Obviously, sometimes the pendulum swings one way or the other. It feels like, oh, you have too much demand, not enough supply, or then the reverse very quickly can happen. But we identified that just philosophically, we wanted the best supply on the market because we wanted to make sure that these American salespeople and go-to-market talent and revenue leaders looking for jobs or just being open to new opportunities wouldn't be turned away because there was a fee that they had to pay, because there might be adverse selection. It might either be those who are, most desperate to get a job that were willing to pay to get one, or those who, for whatever reason, perhaps just knew us already, which was a very limited pool at the time, because as a startup, not many people know you. So we made it free for the supply to join and made sure that we got very good supply. And then we turned to the demand and looked at how can we get, the best demand on the platform. And we do charge the companies. So it was a combination of dealing with building out our own go-to-market process in many countries simultaneously and testing out what worked through a combination of PR, local brand building, but mostly in the early days, like with any startup, referrals and channel partnerships with people who know you and trust you and can vouch for your integrity and your credibility. Because even if you have a great network and great reputation, let's say in San Francisco among a certain cohort of people, maybe that reputation does not transcend to London or to Tel Aviv. And so how can you get that, replicate that reputation? Well, you start by leveraging those that you know and who know you and who trust you, and then working from there.
Got it. And obviously when you're trying to build, you're always looking at your first few clients. How did you manage to get your first big client overseas?
It was through personal connections and referrals, like I alluded to. The people who already knew me from reputation because we either worked together or they were friends, they were willing to take a risk and to trust that, whatever happened, I would do the right thing by them. And I think that makes me, incredibly lucky and fortunate to have had that network overseas, because I think part of the inherent problem that we're trying to solve is when you're doing cross-border business or business totally outside of your network, comfort zone, reputational sphere of influence, it's incredibly hard because you really need to build from scratch. Like it's almost like launching a whole new startup again and again and again, every single new market you're in. And the best thing you can do is try to build a network. And if you have an existing network, that's kind of the seed of your own startup and your own customer base. And then from there you can grow.
Got it. And are you competing with the Deal and the Oyster of the world, where they help you, uh, it makes them easier for them to hire people remotely? Is this something that you're also looking into getting to that particular sector?
We don't compete at all. And also you forgot to mention, in addition to Deal and Oyster, there's Globalization Partners, Papaya Global, Remote, Multiplier, Panther. There's quite a number of venture funded companies that have raised collectively billions of dollars of funding to tackle this space. It shows how big of a space it is and how necessary, and I suppose COVID accelerated the trend of remote work is and has been. we're very complementary to them. We actually partner with quite a few of those companies because they offer the payroll product, but we offer what is, what is very, very valuable for many of our customers, which is actually the talent marketplace of revenue leaders. If you don't have a revenue leader working for you, why do you need a payroll? So in many ways, we're very complementary. And it's not easy to build up this two-sided marketplace because sometimes you run the risk of having something that could seem almost lower quality, and that's not what we wanted. We wanted something where it's, you had mentioned before, we talked earlier about Pavilion prior to this podcast recording. So there are communities like Pavilion and others with fantastic revenue leaders. You want to maintain a high caliber, and part of the reason our caliber can remain high is because we do offer a very unique value proposition. You can think of us almost as like angel lists for international expansion roles. People can get jobs where they can become the country manager or head of growth for a future unicorn. And what's really unique about this is that these unicorns or future unicorns are headquartered totally outside of the US. And so they really empower the revenue leaders to be country managers, like head of North America sales, or, senior account executive, but the first few employees and the founding team members in the US. And like I said, starting in a new country is just like launching another startup. So there's something very powerful about the value proposition for the supply side, which is why I think we still maintain a really high level of talent quality, because it's just unique. There's no other platform like us right now.
Interesting. You mentioned it's like the angel list for international expansion. And, I wanted to talk about how the Googles and the Apples would want their employees to work full time. Maybe not Google, but Tesla and Apple, where the CEOs have said that, remote work is great, but you want to build world-class company, you need to work with your employees face to face. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think you can still build a world-class company with remote talent?
Yes. Well, I would frame it this way. We call it remote talent, but no one is truly remote. Even though I work with most of my clients virtually, it's TechCrunch Disrupt this week. I'll be meeting some of them in person because they'll fly to San Francisco where I live to attend the conference, and I'll be at the conference too. And then in the future, when I go to Bangalore, then I'll definitely meet up with them. So I think if you can augment the efficiency of working from anywhere, again, working from home is almost a misnomer. Work from anywhere. Have the ability to bring your workstation with you in the form of a handheld device or a laptop, and you can plug into Wi-Fi and you can be productive in any time zone at all times. I think it can be done. And also, I understand why Tesla and Apple would sometimes require people to be in person. They're working with hardware. It's very hard to completely build a car remotely and have robots do everything. So there are use cases where in-person makes sense, but for most of our clients, they are digital companies. They are B2B SaaS companies, they're health tech, they're fintech. Most of their work is already done on computers and virtually or in the cloud anyway. In person is good for connection, feeling, connectedness and empathy with your team, feeling like almost camaraderie. So that's why we do team retreats and offsites, and we encourage companies to do that. And the final point I would make on this is keep in mind, if you're an American company, and I used to work for Microsoft APAC, so the headquarters is not APAC, the headquarters is in the US. So the APAC HQ, which is in Singapore, is already quote unquote remote from Redmond, Washington. But that's okay because you have conference calls, you have the ability to fly in for team meetings, but the team in Asia and the team in the US is already inherently working remotely from each other. And so that's why global expansion, in my mind and in the eyes of our clients, is very different from just remote work. This is not like a commodity offshore cheap person that they're trying to hire in the US. This is a valuable central part of their team. And the person has to be in the US because that's where the customer base is. But the HQ and the product team might be in another country. And then perhaps the advertising team or the design team will be still in another country, and perhaps customer success will be still in another country. So every geography, every location, every hybrid model is best fit for the needs of the company, the time zones of the clients, and the cultural affinity and necessity of what it takes to do business.
Got it. Interesting. And what is the business model? Do you work you make money from fees from the companies who become partners on your marketplace, or how does it really work?
Exactly. We only charge the companies. We do not charge the candidates. And we have a couple of, referral partners, but by and large, we just pass on the referral discount to the companies to say, for example, we work with a lot of VCs and they'll refer us their portfolio companies. Well, the VCs are financially they are financially incentivized to want their portfolio companies to be able to expand their revenue and expand globally successfully. So we don't have to pay the VCs for those referrals, but as a gesture of gratitude, and also because it's win-win for everyone, we'll pass along what we would have, let's say, otherwise paid in a referral bonus. We'll pass it along in the form of a discount to the portfolio company. So the companies have, it's kind of a no-brainer for them to test out our platform and to sign up. And then if they do well, and if we help accelerate their growth and global expansion, then that's great for the VCs who originally referred them.
Got it. And Joyce, you've been able to create a great team and have had great set of VCs are backing you. How do you create a environment of safety where people feel they can be honest and transparent when they deal with each other?
I think this is always a really interesting challenge, especially when you deal with diverse teams. And when I talk about diversity, I mean cultural differences. There are some team members who we have team members of different backgrounds, different gender, different sexual orientation, different religions, nationalities. I do think it's important for people to, we believe in kind of transparency, but we also believe in being empathetic. And because we work with clients in other cultures, we can understand that some people are introverts and some are extroverts. Some people are very open with their feedback and others are more reticent. I think it's trying to create a culture and an environment of just awareness of others and giving them the space to voice their opinions and their perspectives, but it isn't easy. And especially in a remote environment, I think this is perhaps one of the biggest downsides of fully remote, which is why we try to emphasize having team retreats where we get to meet each other and connect as people and have more of the non-Zoom, non-work related side conversations that are much better facilitated in person, because there's a bit of Zoom fatigue. We actually tried, and we sometimes still do, like sort of team events like team online game nights or water cooler talks, like virtual water coolers, or sort of Slack has these donut integrations where you can do one-on-one kind of pre-scheduled coffee chats. And we also had language tables so people could practice their foreign languages if they wanted to in virtual settings. So some of those are really fun and they work, but sometimes Zoom fatigue is real, and having yet another scheduled meeting on your calendar, even if it's meant to be a fun meeting, can feel a little bit taxing. So it also is being aware of like making sure to honor people's vacation days, making sure to encourage time off, and then to find connectedness in other avenues.
Got it. And how do you look at conducting and executing on the performance reviews be it for the product team or the sales team or the marketing team?
I think for sales, it's much more straightforward.
Yeah.
Although this does tie back to the original question of, kind of founder-led selling. It is important for startups to be aware that for sales teams, it's important to have revenue targets, and it's important to have compensation that is based on a percentage of earnings, or essentially commission. But it's also important to be flexible and to adapt with the market realities, because a very large, well-oiled machine of a sales, a sales company with a fully automated, fully repeatable, replicable sales process will be able to consistently say, here's your base, here's your OTE, this is the expectation for you to achieve your OTE, and then we expect that X percent of you will achieve it, X percent will fall short, and this is kind of the performance improvement plan if you don't hit your quota, after a consecutive 2 or 3 months or however many sales cycles. For a startup, you don't have the luxury of that. You generally still have performance-based commission, and you have what you hope you hope will be the best and fairest performance structure, but it might not be the case. So we have adapted to it. Of course, it's still uncontroversial, like how many deals did you bring in? How many deals did you close? How much revenue did you generate? But it's also important to note that, okay, sometimes the revenue wasn't generated, not because this person didn't work hard and because they didn't follow all the instructions. It might have just been, we were working with the wrong customers. And that is sometimes a tough pill to swallow, but it's something early stage companies that are still figuring out what the ICP looks like has to come to terms with. And then, and so I think that's also important to have like an honest discussion about how can we coach team members to help them improve. And then in areas where truly there isn't really room for that individual's performance per se, but perhaps the company strategically needs to understand that we're expending more resources going down certain strategic directions with the growth team or the sales team than might make sense. And so how can we as a company recalibrate if all salespeople who are trying to go after a certain market are failing to meet their their quota, then that's a really good sign. So I think iteration, being open-minded and being very humble about learning is probably the name of the game for startups. And even later on, even when you're a well-oiled machine, I do think it's important to take in feedback, but perhaps it's just less dynamic and less subject to change at that point.
Got it. Interesting. And what do you think is the best way to communicate with your team, and does it change over time, especially when you are a scrappy startup, but then you start building up? What are the different communication channels that you have used?
That's also a constant learning. I mean, it's not even just communication channels. We are even seeing, and we see this all the time with our clients, even figuring out what time and cadence to speak is challenging. So when we work with Europe, when we have a sizable team in Asia now, there is no good time zone.
Yeah.
Because, at this point, many members of our team have families and young children. And so in the evenings, it's family time, but in the morning, it's also family time. And those are usually the only hours, especially also since in the US, we have Pacific time zone, Central time zone, Eastern time zone. So, just as a quick example, like we have decided that at least one of our sort of US Asia team time meeting times will be 7:30 a.m. Pacific, which is still kind of cuts into family time for West Coast, but it's already 10:30 a.m. East Coast time, and it's already 8 p.m. IST, or it's already 10:30 p.m. in Beijing and Singapore. So like I said, there isn't necessarily a really great time, but I do think it's important to have at least, it depends on every company, but for us, it's important to have at least one sort of all hands sort of meeting at the beginning of the week. And keep in mind, it's already Monday evening. So it's not technically the very beginning of the week for the Asia team, but having the US team have meetings on Sunday nights and cutting consistently into personal time then also didn't seem appropriate. So even that decision was difficult to sort of reach consensus around. Everyone has to compromise a little bit. And then we try to do as much as we can asynchronous communication. So that's why having a CRM, having very, very updated notes, having recordings of calls, having asynchronous communication through our own product, through even Slack, having some Slack messages has been quite important, in email as well. So communication skills and empathy become even more valuable when you deal with these different time zones. Because you can't ask someone a question directly. Maybe you're working on a deal and then it's right now, for example, it's 2 p.m. Pacific time. Well, I know that this is 2:30 a.m. IST. So if I had a question for my team in India, it would be inappropriate for me to send them a Slack or WhatsApp message right now, because maybe their notifications would wake them up. And that's just not something I want to do to them. So I'll just sort of have to hold it in, maybe log it away. Or sometimes I like to use the send later feature in email. I'll put in an email, I'll send it later and set it for, 8 p.m. my time. So it pops up in their inbox at 8:30 a.m. So then it's a more appropriate time for them to kind of look at the emails and not feel stressed out that they're getting, emails from me at 2 a.m.
Got it. Super interesting. And you talked about decision making. How do you approach decision making frameworks, and how do you, especially in a startup, how do you balance the speed versus the quality of decision? That's something which I still struggle, even though I've been into startups for such a long time.
Me too. I mean, Rohit, I'm sure we could have a lot of discussions about how we would do this. I don't think that I necessarily have a perfect solution for it, but I do think one of the mantras that we have too is like, be proactive and have a bias for action. So it's very easy to over intellectualize go to market and sales and growth. But until you do it, it's all theoretical. And theory doesn't generate ARR.
Yeah.
You have to actually execute. And so we do try to have kind of the North Star of our strategy and what we're doing. It helps too that we understand now at this point, product market fit, who our customers are and how to be focused. And there will be times in which something comes up where it might be a distraction. And I think, ultimately it's for the team to discuss together, and then for whoever, and there might be an escalation of decision making, and for me as a CEO to ultimately decide. But right now, I think we're in the phase where it's about execution, especially because we are in a tricky financial market. A lot of economists talk about a looming or impending recession, and I think that enforces a lot of discipline, because when you know that you might not have the luxury of running a lot of experiments in the short term and kind of taking big bets that burn a lot of cash and might not end up in anything, well, then if everyone's aligned on the fact that you need to just extend runway, or you need to just generate as much revenue and net profits as possible, then it makes decision making a bit easier. You can kind of cut out a lot of the noise. But in the future, you don't want to forever just be focused on cash, because just a cash generating business might not be the highest growth business. There's actually a law of, I think, a power law of 40, as they call it, the trade-off between EBITDA and month over month growth percentages. So you don't want to forever be trapped in the path of trying to generate or maximize returns without thinking of investment towards the future, especially on the product side and R&D side. So I'd imagine that once we get past this financial period, then we'll reinvest a lot more in the R&D and product side. But right now, we're really focused on revenue generation and growth.
Got it. Interesting. And what advice would you give to founders who are listening to the podcast, and how do you raise today in this challenging market conditions?
It's definitely still possible to raise. So if it makes the founders listening feel better, there is definitely dry powder out there. And if you think about it this way, investors don't make money from sitting on the money. They make money through deploying capital.
Right.
And if they don't deploy the capital within the time horizon that they raise from LPs, then they have to give the money back. So they're definitely not going to do that. Right now, it's a little bit of a wait and see game, but then a lot of investors are still investing. And I think as a founder, just be aware of how much money you need. Also be aware that perhaps the terms won't be as favorable right now as they might be later. But if you need the cash now, and that's the only way to survive, it's still better to ensure the survival of your company than just to ensure that you get better terms, or not even ensure, just to hope that you get better terms later, because maybe you'll even get worse terms in a few months, and maybe the markets will turn around. But then on the flip side, if you're a founder who has ample run rate and you don't need to fundraise, then don't do it. It's a distraction. It's a waste of time. It might end up not helping you achieve your ends, and you might end up feeling kind of frustrated with the whole process. So you can save yourself some agony. If you can still hold out for another 2 years, then they usually say no need to fundraise. But if you have, let's say less than 6 months of run rate, then you certainly should right now, even if the conditions are less favorable. But there's definitely capital out there. Just be prepared to perhaps either have a down round, a flat round, or something that might not seem as favorable. But in the long run, it's a marathon, not a sprint. In the long run, if you want to build a really successful company, then you will find a way to make it work. And everything just needs survival right now is the mantra.
Got it. And especially when it comes to raising funds, are there any terms which founders should optimize for and should not optimize for, in your view?
I think it really depends. Some founders are more dilution sensitive. Some are more, want more control of the board sensitive. Some actually welcome investors onto their board because they think it's a good indication that the investor will be really value add, as opposed to see this as kind of a micro check and, sort of a castaway and not spend time on it. So I think founders should be really quite open-minded about it. But I would say the relationship between the investor and the founder is really important. Find people who believe in you. Find people who you trust and who trust you in turn, and you really think can help you. That to me is really important. And I think if you trust them and they have your best intentions in mind, of course, they're still going to try to get a good deal. I mean, they're in the business to make money, but be wary of investors who try to put in these predatory terms in the term sheets. If they are fair, even if the valuation is a bit lower than you'd like to see, then that is a good sign. But if they put in a lot of these caveats, a lot of side letters, a lot of other terms that just don't sit well with you, then kind of trust that instinct and look into it a bit further before you sign that term sheet.
Got it. Interesting. And I quickly want to do the top three. What's your favorite business book?
There are a lot of really good ones out there. I think I already mentioned Hard Things About Hard Things and The Cold Start Problem, but How to Win Friends and Influence People, I think is really great. Also, Never Eat Alone. Those are books that are obviously a lot more about interpersonal skills, but I think especially as you become a leader of an ever larger and more complex organization or an executive at a bigger company, most of your job really is on the interpersonal side. You're no longer in the weeds of doing technical things as much on the day-to-day, whether that means technical on the business side of like selling individual deals or technical on the product side of writing lines of code. It's really about managing teams, influencing others, and winning their trust.
Got it. We'll put that in the show notes. And if you could go back in time when you started Alariss, what is the one thing you would have focused on or done anything differently?
Yeah, I think, in the early days, I think I was trying to be a little bit of everything to everyone, which is not the answer. I probably should have focused a little earlier. But that being said, I'm glad I tested out a lot of hypotheses. I feel like I learned a lot, but I think I should have been okay. And this is still something I remind myself. It's okay to not be everything to everyone. It's okay to say, no, we're not a good fit. And no, I'm sorry, I don't think we can work together. Because you can preserve your time and your energy for those customers and those partners that you can really, really do a good job working with. And that will matter so much more than trying to be the partner to 100 different people and having each of them have a mediocre experience. Even just like one very, very satisfied customer is worth more than that.
Got it. And do you have any favorite online tools, example, Gmail, Slack, Zoom?
I actually really like HubSpot. I have been impressed. I mean, I'm just so impressed by how, even when you look at their growth trajectory and how they've managed to become one of the market leaders and finding this niche and first being seen as kind of a Salesforce copycat or lookalike to being this full suite of solutions. I mentioned a couple of HubSpot features earlier, like the send later feature or even the calendar links. I just feel like so much of HubSpot includes apps that I no longer even need to use. Like I don't need to use Calendly anymore because I have it. I don't need to use the boomerang feature. So it's just been very easy. And because the team is in so many different time zones, I go to HubSpot to look at all the activity and all the meeting notes very consistently for the deals that we're working on. And I like the fact that I can see, at every time zone, there's someone kind of logging things, and it gives me a good sense of activity and what's going on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think HubSpot has been also one of my favorite tools. We'll put that in the show notes. And Joyce, what is the best way people can reach out to you and know more about Alariss?
Sure. Well, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. You'll find me with Alariss, Alariss, or reach out through Twitter. My Twitter handle is at Joyce, Yanzhang. So Joyce Zhang. Or we also have an Alariss LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram and a bunch of accounts. So it's always at Alariss or at Alariss Global.
Awesome. Put that in the show notes. Joyce, thank you so much for taking our time speaking to us. I really enjoyed my conversation with you.
Same. Thank you so much, Rohit.